Afternoon and welcome to this, in my opinion, very important and very urgent conversation about the Gaza project, collaborative investigations without access. My name is Frederik Obermaier. I'm the director of the newsroom Paper Trail Media, and I'm honored to moderate this discussion with some of the most courageous and committed figures in investigative journalism. Since October 7th, Gaza has become the deadliest conflict for press in modern history. To this day, 167 journalists have, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists, been killed, and access for foreign reporters is nearly impossible without a few exceptions. If we go back to those figures, I think it's a number that is hard to digest because it means one journalist is getting killed every 3 days. And that was also one of the reasons why the Gaza project was launched. It was coordinated by Forbidden Stories. It brought together 50 journalists from 13 different media outlets to investigate the targeting, killing, and intimidation of journalists in Gaza and the West Bank. What stood out to me and what, in my opinion, made this project very special is that it brought together Israeli, Arab, Palestinian, and Western journalists working hand in hand to investigate the killings of our fellow colleagues. And I think we all know about the sensitivities of this project and of this conflict. And I think that stood out, that this Forbidden Stories brought together this team of journalists. Today we are joined by, to my left, Hoda Osman, the executive editor of Arab Reporters for Investigative Journalism, who played a key role in coordinating and verifying reports from the region, especially being in contact with those colleagues still working on the ground in Gaza. Then here is Laurent Richard, the founder and executive director of Forbidden Stories, who led this collaboration. It is not the first collaboration, it's one in a row of many important investigations and cooperations on killed journalists. And joining us remotely, and I hope the audience can see her now. Hello, Manisha, the visual investigations lead at The Guardian, whose expertise in open source intelligence shaped many of the project's findings. We'll begin to get you all like a short introduction of what the Gaza project was about with a short trailer, and then we will immediately dive in. We will also take some of the questions afterwards. You know the organizers at this conference are very strict on timing, so be on the point with your questions then. So if we could get the trailer started now. There seems to be a problem with the trailer. I get signaled from the back, so we are starting right into it, but you can watch the trailer if you visit the homepage of Forbidden Stories. You should do so anyway if you haven't done so. Sorry?
I think it's good for the trailer for you to play. It's like we are live on television and is that okay to play or maybe not?
No? Then we...
No, do you have it?
No?
Okay.
Well, that was only a cell phone ringing and not the trailer. So we get started right into it. So let's start with Hoda. Hoda, you've worked closely with journalists on this project that are still being trapped in Gaza. Many of them have lost their homes, families, and they still keep on reporting. Can you share a little bit with all of us what it means for those colleagues to continue working and what life means in Gaza these days?
Thank you, Frederik. I want to start by saying that it's an absolute honor and truly the honor of my career to have been so closely connected with Palestinian journalists in Gaza over the past 18 months. I think a lot of the people in the room here are aware. They watch the videos and they see the pictures and they know about what is happening to the journalists in Gaza, from, of course, the killing to losing family members, to losing homes and offices and equipment, to working from tents and living in tents in the heat and the cold and the rain. I don't think that they would want us to feel sorry for them, and they should not be defined by those challenges, but they should be defined by how they've responded to those challenges. And they've responded with courage, they've responded with persistence, with a lot of dignity, and with a commitment to doing stellar journalism. So I want to talk about that and talk about how, as part of the Gaza Project was a series of investigations about the targeting of journalists. If you ask any journalist in Gaza, they're like, I'm being targeted. It's very clear. You don't need to investigate it. So when we started those investigations, a lot of the sources were journalists themselves, because we're investigating the targeting of the journalists. They were at the scene, they were their colleagues. They were not offended by us asking the questions. They understood the importance of verifying the information. They understood the importance of giving us the original photo so we can geolocate. So it's a level of journalism and doing journalism with integrity that I really had never seen before.
For those of us who are not as well connected to the region as you are and the team of Arish is, could you tell us a little bit, because I know, as my team was part of the Gaza project, I know that you talked many hours and hours with colleagues still on the ground. I know that this was very difficult conversations, but could you tell us a little bit what the daily life means for them at the moment? What risks are they facing doing their job?
They risk getting killed. They risk their families getting killed. They have to make difficult decisions. Do I sleep with my family in the same place, or am I endangering them by doing so? Do I put on my flak jacket, or is it going to make me a target? Am I going to get targeted because of it? I think that they also feel abandonment. I think we have to reckon with the fact that even though at this festival there were several sessions about the journalists in Gaza, their organization is doing great work as far as support or issuing statements or filing lawsuits, that collectively as a community we have failed them. Because where are the newsrooms? Where are the editors? Where are the journalists? Where are the headlines? It's not even getting coverage anymore. When other journalists in other parts of the world, and there has nothing has been, as you mentioned, at this scale. Brown University actually just did this study by the Cost of War project, and they said like several wars combined, including the 2 world wars, the war in Afghanistan, the Civil War, the Vietnam War, together, collectively, the number of journalists killed does not come. And it's not just about the number, but it's like, what does it say about us as journalists and about journalism as a profession when we say that we hold the powerful to account, we're supposed to support people who do so, but it just doesn't match, it's not proportionate to what is happening. And the level of impunity and lack of accountability is just beyond anything, and nothing is being done about it. And you can say, well, what are these actions are going to take? But we've seen, like, our other colleagues, like, we've seen campaigns, we've seen pins. Where are the pins? Like, where's the campaigns? It's very little. It just doesn't match to what's happening.
You said we failed them. Could you, Laurent, tell us a little bit how you wanted to change this and could walk us a little bit through the difficulties of this project, also taking into account that the journalists we reported upon were the only ones being able to access the Gaza Strip, which is in these days a very rare case that you cannot enter the field that you're reporting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's true that all the projects we are running with Forbidden Stories, and our mission, for those who are not aware about who we are, is our mission is to continue the work of journalists who have been killed, jailed or threatened, and we are not doing any kind of advocacy. We are just investigative journalists teaming up with others to make sure that people get access to information and that the killers will receive the signal that killing the journalist won't kill the story. That's our DNA, that's our mission, and every project, every collaboration we have done for the past almost 8 years have been all the time very complicated. This one more than others, for 2-3 reasons. The first one is that's a conflict which is kind of unique in history of conflict, that we are prevented to enter inside the zone, inside the conflict zone. And the journalists over there in Gaza are survivors amongst survivors. And they try to report, but they try to survive. And so, as Hoda mentioned, they have to make every 10 seconds difficult decisions about what do they want to do in the next hour to report or to survive. That's about that kind of decision they are taking every minute, every hour. Our goal with Forbidden Stories is to show exactly what the killers don't want to hide. In that specific case, launching a project like the Gaza Project was obvious. More than 170 journalists, or even more, it depends on organizations who are counting the death, have been killed in a short time. That was crucial to investigate not only the targeting of journalists and to determine with journalism if they were targeted because they were doing some journalism or if they were civilians amongst other civilians. So I can later explain a little bit about the methodology, and Manisha will explain as well how HOSINT was very an important tool to that. But that was challenging first for that, because we were prevented to get access to the zone, so how to investigate remotely. The second thing is that Gaza is a topic, is an issue, is a part of the world that is one of the most dividing issues on the planet. And how to assemble and some international partners on a single project, and just focusing on facts and forgetting about some kind of ideas we might have. And I think, of course, we did not stop the war at all, but I think we succeed in one thing, is showing that, as you mentioned, we were both working with Israeli journalists and Palestinian journalists. We were both working with German journalists and French journalists and British-based journalists as well. So that was, I think, from since October 7, one of the first international coalition involving Israeli and Palestinian journalists working together for one specific mission: delivering information. Delivering information about the targeting, but also pursuing the work of those who have been killed. And what was very important for me as well, that we used to see the Gaza conflict much more now as a kind of, most of the stories are about the matrix. How many strikes, how many killings, how many buildings were destroyed. And it's more stories that we talk in terms of numbers, and we forget to, and we don't have the means to discuss about the starvation going over there and the impact of the war. So yeah, that was a very challenging project, but and we did that in 2 rounds. We just published this Gaza Project 2 recently, and someone want to say something to you. That's cool. Thank you. And yeah, and just to end on that before the trailer, it's an important working together. That's a mission of Forbidden Stories, assembling journalists working together to continue the work who have been silenced. It's so crucial, precisely in that period of time where we are surrounded by either autocrats or future potential autocrats, where we can see democracy falling live hour after hour. I really believe that what the enemies of the press freedom don't like is sometimes they don't care too much about statement. They really are much more afraid about having their own crimes exposed or having the stories being alive and being published by journalists.
That's a nice introduction to the trailer that we of course plan to do after 2 statements. So we can now play the trailer before we jump to Manisha to London.
Tens of thousands of Palestinians and more than 1,000 Israelis have been killed since October.
By this blackout, they're trying to stop the world from seeing what's happening in Gaza.
Where there is a strong potential for a war crime being committed, the live stream becomes critical evidence.
The Committee to Protect Journalists says it's the deadliest conflict for reporters, photographers, and camera operators since the group began tracking casualties in 1992.
Those who are still there, they've been injured, they've been detained, they lost family members, they've lost equipment, and they also fear reporting publicly.
It's a war also in the media, and we know it.
In this project, we tried to expose some of the way the Israeli authorities are treating journalists both in Gaza and in the West Bank.
We are using techniques like geolocation, chronolocation, satellite imagery to find positions and narrow down the timeline of when specific hits happened.
We were able to achieve a very devastating account of what is happening in the Gaza Strip against journalists.
So many journalists have been killed trying to tell us what is happening over there. For the Gaza project, we joined forces to make sure that there is no information blackout.
إذا كانت هذه السترة التي من المفترض أن تحمينا فهي الآن من تؤذينا هي من تؤذينا.
Thank you. We would now directly jump to Manisha because you saw the videos now. You can imagine how cruel the photos have been that Manisha and her colleagues sift through. They scraped hundreds of thousands of Telegram messages, watched numerous videos, photos that journalists on the ground and witnesses on the ground sent us. And Manisha, could you walk us a little bit through one of those investigations and explain a little bit how what we all use as journalists, the term OSINT, how this works and what it means in such a case?
Thanks, Frederik, and I'm very sorry not to be there in person. So because of Israel and Egypt blocking access to foreign journalists into Gaza, and also because the journalists who are eyes on the ground, the Palestinians who are remaining behind, are being effectively starved, killed, and are repeatedly being affected by telecoms blackouts, we had to use mostly remote sensing techniques, which is a part of open source intelligence. And there were two key streams that were really important for this. One is satellite imagery, and the second is the live streams, which we mentioned in the trailer. And just to show you an example of how we did that, I'll talk you through two of the investigations very quickly to show the two types of casualties. So when you're looking at these numbers of Palestinian journalists who've died, you're just seeing lists of hundreds and hundreds of journalists. And we wanted to break them down into two categories. We found that 30% of the casualties of Palestinian journalists in Gaza were working for Hamas-aligned media, and about 70% were non-partisan or freelancers. So we worked on these two case studies. The non-partisan one is really interesting because we honed in on an institution in Gaza called Press House. It's a non-partisan incubator training journalists, and all the light blue flak jackets that you saw in images of the war were actually handed out as safety equipment by Press House. It's funded by the Swiss and Norwegian governments, and it was led by this brilliant man called Laurent Richard. Now, throughout the start of the war, the Israeli army has been asking civilians to move from the northern half to the southern half and saying that if you remain in the northern half, you will be considered a terrorist. Most of the journalists of Press House remained in the northern half to continue reporting. But by the first month of the war, a majority of the key journalists associated with this incubator had died. It's at that point that the founder, Bilal, who had remained behind because he didn't want to abandon his colleagues, decided it was time to move south. He, like Hoda mentioned, was convinced that they were being targeted specifically for being journalists. Now, the way you move from north to southern Gaza is through a highway. It's called Salah al-Din Road, and it runs parallel to the coast. There are specific safe hours that are designated by the IDF and put out in official documentation when civilians are safely supposed to move south. So Bilal did exactly that. He went down the safe route, which was marked safe by the IDF. This is really important. Packed his ID as instructed and was driving down when his car was hit. He was severely injured and bled to death while being moved to hospital. We decided to find out exactly why he died when he was traveling on an IDF safe route on IDF safe designated hours. And what we found by doing analysis on the car is I was able to speak to two weapons experts, one British and one American, who said that there was a very high probability that his car was actually hit by an Israeli tank shell. So what we have here is effectively somebody, a civilian, following IDF instructions to evacuate on designated IDF safe route and being killed by IDF weaponry. This basically typifies what 70% of journalists in Gaza are currently facing, because there is simply no safe space in Gaza, irrespective of assurances that they have received from the Israeli military. And the Israeli military so far has not answered any questions on why they cannot guarantee their safety. Now, going back to the 30% who are Hamas-aligned media, now the international humanitarian law says that irrespective of your politics, if you are a journalist, then you will be given the same protections that is given to civilians. Now, we noticed that a majority of the casualties came from Al-Aqsa media. And we went and asked the IDF spokesperson, how do you characterize Hamas-aligned journalists? And the spokesperson told us on the record, they do not see any difference between Hamas militants and Hamas-aligned journalists. We presented this comment to international humanitarian law experts who said this is a willful mischaracterization of international law. What was even more interesting is that when we ran the story with this headline, quoting the IDF spokesperson, several hours later, the IDF put out a press release saying that their spokesperson misspoke to us on the record. So in summary, if you're the 70% who is non-partisan, you will die because there is no safe space. And if you're in the 30% who are working for Hamas-aligned media, and bear in mind, Hamas runs the Gaza Strip, it's very difficult to do any kind of work without paying allegiance to Hamas because that is the government, then you will be seen as a target. In terms of the sort of limitations that we faced, obviously, most of our work was beholden to the satellite imagery companies, and that was really tricky because these companies themselves have their own commercial interests, and they can restrict satellite imagery when needed. And a lot of these companies are vendors to the same states that you might end up investigating. A really good example is our relationship with the satellite imagery provider Maxar. We were investigating a hit on the AFP bureau offices in Gaza. And to essentially determine that hit, which was thankfully caught by the AFP live stream cameras attached to the building, we needed to find out exactly where the IDF tank positions were, because we were able to do audio analysis of the moment of the hit and ascertain that it was indeed a tank shell that exploded inside the bureau offices and destroyed it completely. But Maxar refused to release this imagery of the IDF tanks, which was critical to us holding the IDF to account for attacking a press structure, which is again protected by international law. The second problem is that, as Hoda mentioned, a lot of open source only works when you have people on the ground who can corroborate that testimony. That's what makes this testimony really strong. But if the sources on the ground are being systematically starved, killed, and silenced, it's very difficult to do this job. And then on the third level of problem that you're facing is verification, because this is a war that has been characterized by an insane amount of propaganda and disinformation, which is being pushed out and is overtaking the actual narrative. So it's very difficult to find the right piece of video evidence and chronologate and geolocate it to actually figure out what's happening on the ground.
You mentioned Maxar not handing out potential proof for war crimes, which is, for those of you who are in contact with Maxar, or if there's somebody in this audience working for Maxar, that might be a little bit hint of that you could help journalists here, and I think you could help also the public. Which brings us to one question that I've heard many times when speaking about the Gaza project, and that is, what did you find out about the intentionality behind these attacks? Because we all know that in a conflict where reporters work in the front lines, report their journalists get killed but still we have outstanding numbers here in Gaza, and the question arises, is there some intention by the IDF, so that's the Israeli military, to attack journalists?
I think in the case where they admitted on the record that they see Hamas-aligned media as deliberate targets, that is sort of them in doing their own interpretation of international law to basically say that if you are a Hamas-aligned journalist, then you are fair game, that it is okay to target you. They might walk that statement back later, but the fundamental fact stands that some people in the IDF do see some journalists who are aligned with Hamas as targets, and that is also supported by the data, which shows that a majority of the casualties in this war have come from Al-Aqsa, which is a Hamas-aligned media. And then the second is that any party, any state that is involved in a conflict has a responsibility to ensure safe passage and evacuation of civilians, and also needs to guarantee the safety of these journalists as civilians. This is encoded in the Geneva Convention. And if you look at the circumstances around which Bilal died, which is very similar to the circumstances around which a lot of other journalists have died, then we can see that the IDF are doing everything mostly as a checklist exercise. They're not actually implementing any safeguards to guarantee the safety of journalists on the Strip. And by doing so, they're actually in violation of international law.
Can I say something too?
Sure.
We analyzed the CPJ data with the first round of the Gaza project, and the vast majority of the journalists had been killed at home. So the notion that the journalists are in these dangerous areas, it's a combat zone, and that's why they're getting killed, is just simply not true. The other thing is that this pattern, and this has actually become increasingly the pattern recently, is that the Israeli army no longer denies. Initially, it was like denial, and then it would be followed. And CPJ actually has done a very good job of documenting these patterns of response. And it was called propaganda by the CPJ representative we spoke to during the Gaza Project 1. But recently, what's happening is that Israel actually admits to killing the journalists, accuses the journalists of being connected to militants. We, as a consortium, during the second round, we asked, okay, tell us, give us the evidence, and then there's no response. And I have to mention here that during the second round, we did a story on drone journalists and the targeting of drone journalists. 5 drone journalists were killed, a 6th was injured. And Forbidden Stories had hired a drone journalist to work on a story about the targeting of drone journalists. 2 days after he had filmed for us, this drone journalist was killed. Again, Israel issued a statement saying, misspelling a name, not actually really naming him. A lot of the statements are very confusing because they include just like confusing information. And then this directly affected us as a consortium. We asked them for further elaboration, and they said we're not going to issue any further statements.
And this brings us, Laurent, I think to the question, how did the Israeli government, the Israeli military, and the Israeli public react to the findings?
Yeah, so I think what we were able to achieve is to show the global pattern about the war, against access to information, and that's a global strategy. The shutdown first of the internet, of the access to electricity, of information, then the targeting of the headquarters of the newsroom. We investigate during the first Gaza project how many headquarters and newsroom have been targeted, including the AFP office, and we were able to prove, thanks to geolocation, that it was really an Israeli tank from a position that we geolocate that was at the origin of the shooting on the AFP office, that was having a camera filming H24, the area, and the IDF decided to shoot on that direction. We expose as well that many stories of people who were journalists who were operating some drones, and we investigate through the Israeli army sources as well. What is your policy regarding drones operator? And they say, we don't have any policy. If we see any drones, we shoot. But what about if it's an activist or a journalist using a drone, because that's the only way to really document the consequences of the war. And there is no policy. Then we were able to access some internal memo of the IDF and Ministry of Justice of Israel, where they are very concerned about being sued by international court because of that lack of regulation regarding the drone operator, for instance. What we have seen as well is a systemic way to discredit and to launch disinformation campaign on journalists that have been killed. And what is happening it's always the same pattern. One journalist has been killed by a strike, and then officially the Israelis will say, we never target journalists, but that person was not a journalist, was a terrorist. And then sometimes they will provide documentation supporting their claims, but when we look at the evidence, it's never solid enough. So this is the global reaction of the IDF when we were investigating those cases.
When you published last summer, the IDF, at least in some cases, after being pushed by the consortium, promised to investigate those killings. That's like 10 months ago. What happened so far?
Yeah, and there is during the second project, Mariana, who is here on the first row, did a very long investigation about what is happening inside Israeli authorities about how to be prevented to be sued by the international court. And there is a strategy. There is a rule, there is a regulation that the ICC cannot take a criminal cases, cannot start a criminal investigation if on the national soil there is already a criminal case that is open. And I think there are more than 700 or 800 cases that have been opened since 2014, something like that. But less than 1% of those cases have been really prosecuted at the end. So it's a way to prevent the ICC to start criminal investigation. And by the way, the Netanyahu government made a law that is making forbidden for any entities based in Israel to work with the ICC as well. So that's a global behavior to be prevented to respond on potential war crimes.
Although I wondered if you could explain a little bit to our audience what it means, what is happening in Gaza, not only for the journalists in Gaza, but for the world, for all of us, because we are relying on brave journalists on the ground who still report what is going on. Normally in other conflicts we have seen CNN, BBC all sending in reporters and having local reporters and thereby creating a very broad picture of what is going on. But what does it mean to the global perception of the conflict if there's only some reporters left on the ground? They are working on the constant threat of being killed, and no foreign journalists are being able to help on the ground, to basically go there because they're prevented by the IDF.
It means that we're not seeing everything that is happening there, and there is no doubt about it. As horrific as what we're seeing is, there's a lot that we're not seeing. There are areas, especially in the north, that for a long time now, there has been no reporting from there because it was too dangerous, and the journalists get the message too, you know, they keep getting killed, and then there's certain areas are off limits, and that's why when we did the drone project, so part of the project was the targeting of the journalists, and another part of the project was actually continuing in the spirit of forbidden stories, like, you know, keeping the stories alive. So we decided to film with drones in two areas, that Jabalia, which was like very hard to film there, and El Shati camp, because Abdullah Al-Haj, one of the journalists who got injured and both his legs were amputated, was filming there to try and show what the journalists couldn't show. But there's no question that we're not getting all the information, all the images that we could possibly be getting from there. As a consortium, also it's important to mention that we did submit a request to the Israeli government and military to give us access, and we were not granted access to get into Gaza to report from there.
So for those of you who have not seen these impressive pictures, go to the sites of Arish, of Forbidden Stories, and also of Bellingcat, because it was not only drone pictures, it was an impressive 3D modeling based on those drone pictures. You can basically fly in this area and see all the destroyed buildings. You can see the tents, the people are living in there. I think it's really something new, something outstanding, and I hope it's also like a new way of visualizing destruction in regions as the Gaza Strip. So we don't have that much time left, as you know. It's a very strict timetable here. We have 15 minutes left. I would give a first round free for questions from the audience, if there are some. I'm not sure if we have a microphone for the room. Yes, we have one, and we have the first question over there.
Hello. I'm enjoying is the wrong word. I'm very impressed by all of the work that you've done and all that you've gathered. I'm wondering whether you have an additional layer of a legal analysis of what the crimes are and where you could possibly actually take that accountability. You glanced at it when you talked about the possibility of something at the ICC and the difficulty there is with whether there's any local processes. But I'm just wondering, is there any prospect that you have of saying, look, that we can actually take a case somewhere on this?
On that, our job is to publish the stories and to investigate, and our methodology was to do some what we call collaborative journalism and to publish pieces. And then it's up to the ICC, to countries, to governments to do their job, and to civil society and to advocacy organizations to do their own job. We, on our end, we are not here to ask governments to do their job, because we are just journalists. We are here to talk about the facts, and it's already a lot. So then it will be up to other organization or international organization or the ICC to do what they try to do. But this is as well why we investigate as journalists the methodology used by the government of Israel to be prevented, to be prosecuted on specifically those war crimes.
But if I may add, there is already some criminal complaints filed in several countries outside of Israel in this regard, sometimes in very generic terms, sometimes very specifically aimed at IDF soldiers who allegedly have been involved in targeted killings of civilians. So there is something happening already, but this is rather in general not specifically aimed at the killings of journalists.
And I think Reporters Without Borders is submitting like maybe 12 cases before the ICC, or maybe a little bit more of some cases where they think there are strong evidence based on those different stories that they should bring to the ICC those cases.
So we have the next question. Or
Thank you.
I
already have the mic. Thank you. I want to take this somewhere else, because some of you are talking about it all the time as a conflict. This is the word you chose, and it's a choice you make. And I know you are journalists looking after facts, but facts too are that there is a case in the ICJ, plausible genocide. There are plenty of respectable human rights organizations, including the UN, the Human Rights Watch, etc., that said it's a genocide. It's a genocide. And yet we are seeing so many journalists avoiding using this word. And I was wondering also like how you can work on the issue of targeting journalists without the context, the narrative, the real context that is happening in every single aspect in Gaza. It's a war of annihilation, not just against journalists, but against every aspect of life. So I'm wondering how you continue to work on this, but really not realizing that the context is very important in your work. Thank you.
Who of you wants to take that question? Manisha, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think I really thank you for the question, and I think, as you mentioned, the context is really important. But as you mentioned, it is the ICJ and it is the international courts who have to decide on genocide. So what we're doing as journalists is compiling the evidence and compiling the facts. Now, if somebody wants to, as a lawyer, take all of that evidence and add to that and say that this sort of paints a picture that contributes to the genocide, or is part of the genocide, and then if the court rules on that as such, then that's that's something that we'd be very happy to report. But as such, we're still at a very early stage, and we're not legal experts, and we're not judges. So it is not for us to say whether or not this is actually genocide. What we can say is that there are serious violations of the Geneva Convention. These are unlawful killings, and these are war crimes, and this is the pattern of targeting that we have found. And it is up for the legal experts to put a definition on it, because a genocide is sort of the legal outcome, it's the result, and what we're doing is right at the start of that workflow. And I'm really sorry, that's a really technical, it seems like a very heartless response, and I'm really sorry that I'm not able to say any more on this, and I completely understand where you're coming from.
Can I say something? I just want to clarify that the way that we worked in the Gaza project, each newsroom was independent in the terms that it wants to use and the way that it wants to write it. And yesterday there was an excellent session on how the Western media has covered this, and there are, of course, a lot of problems with this. So there are outlets that choose to use the word genocide, others choose to use other words. So it isn't that as a consortium we're all deciding to use one word or another.
So there's another question, and afterwards there's one question in the first row as well.
Hello, my name is Sandra from Finland. I'm wondering more of a practical question. You mentioned that you gained access to Israeli government documents. Is there any sources, any whistleblowers within the Israeli governments that you've had any help from, or that in general exist, that are helping journalists uncover things?
Do you want?
Yes, of course we were able to get access to some sources from many parts, including the Israeli authorities. We were able to get access to some leak of data from the Israeli Ministry of Justice as well, where we were seeing some communication between the unit within the Ministry of Justice of Israel, who is in charge of responsibility of Israel on the international scene. So that was kind of crucial documents we were able to analyze. We used that kind of data set was very helpful as well in another investigation we did about the Pegasus project, where we find some interesting pieces of evidence. Now it's true that there are more and more soldiers who are coming back from the Strip, from the Gaza Strip, more and more reservists as well. So in Israel there are a lot of association, movement, organization of people really working for peace over there, and yeah, who are willing to speak to journalists to provide documents that they think could be of public interest.
And having said that, there is kind of a FOIA in Israel, and there's more and more lawyers taking on enforcing those FOIA laws. So if you are searching for those, you will find them. If you're searching for documents, some of those who have been referred to and some are not, you can also go to Distributed Denial of Secrets. They have recently obtained some documents on Israel, on internal documents from Israeli ministries, so that's a good starting point for others. We even encountered that FOIA in other countries where you would not have expected is kind of helpful, as you're coming from a Nordic country. The Nordic countries are especially quick, I may say, on FOIA, contrary to other countries like the one I'm coming from. So that's also a good starting point. And then there's one question in the first row, and I think that is the last one, if I read the signals the right way.
Hi, thank you for this amazing session. I'm Janine DiGiovanni. I'm the CEO of the Reckoning Project, and we're a war crimes unit that works mainly in Ukraine, but in other parts of the world. There's another element here which I think is really important, and that's, I've worked in Gaza since 1990, so I have many colleagues, friends, that are both dead now, but also working under incredibly difficult conditions. I'm really shocked at the number of our colleagues who have not had the moral clarity to stand up for Gaza. And also for those, many of us, who are threatened by our donors who say they will pull out if we work in Gaza. the threats on those working with the ICC, that we could be individually sanctioned. So I've worked as a journalist for a very long time, more than 30 years, and I've never seen a situation like this, where when we clearly see what is absolutely hideous, something going on, a genocide, there are so many people that are not acknowledging it. And these are very, serious journalists, important papers that could have done so much more that have not. So I think there's also a kind of reckoning for the press itself, who have not done what we should be doing for our incredibly courageous colleagues in Gaza. Thank you.
Yeah. And adding to this as well, that we are very thankful to be. We have worked with the 972, that is an Israeli-based publication that is working both with Palestinian and Israeli journalists, and with a team of Guzum, of Yuval Abraham, who won the Oscar for Northern, and they are doing an amazing job, and we should also think of them, because they are operating from a very difficult space.
I just want to say thank you, Janine. I encourage, there's a lot of journalists in the room, please report on it, write about a day in the life of a journalist in Gaza. We're happy to help you at Arish, connect with journalists there, find a story. It doesn't have to be investigative, and just keep writing about it, please.
So thanks a lot for this very powerful conversation, and thank you for your work in bearing witness when others cannot. So thanks a lot, and I think it's also important, we spoke a lot about journalists in Gaza, and I think we should always keep them in mind. We stand with them. Keep up your courageous work if you hear us. The world needs you. Thank you. Thank you, Manisha, for being here from London, and have a nice afternoon.